Thank you, Anita. Thanks, Venki and Narasimhan, for this warm welcome. I'm indeed very happy to join this session today. In particular, I have high regard for ISACA members. This is one professional body in India which takes its job seriously. It has very active chapters all over the country. And the most important thing I feel is very important from a professional community building point of view is that it has office bearers who are constantly changing. New people are coming in, shouldering the responsibility. And that is very important because every member of the community has to contribute to building of the community, building of the profession. And that is the only way to ensure that the profession gets its due. And it's very good to see Saga chapters doing this very successfully across the country. Uh, Now, as you might have seen from my introduction, I've been like a rolling stone doing this and that at various points of time. And I consider myself an uh, early kind of adopter of risk discipline when it comes to technology. And one of the points I didn't include in my introduction was that I tried a PhD program, trying to get a PhD in cybersecurity in 2004, and I discontinued the project. I had to give it up because it required a lot of commitment and going very deep in a certain area. As my interests have always been very diverse and horizontal, so that's how I kind of got out of it. But I think having been in this field for more than 16, 17 years, uh, one gathers a perspective which may not be very identifiable for a small group of very specialized people, but they may be relevant from a overall perspective kind of view. And that is the perspective I generally try to project. My experience in last 5 years has been to run a company for RBI, and that is a by definition being a CEO is a general management job, and it keeps you away from professional issues, not so much as you are when you're a practitioner. However, since part of the remit was cybersecurity for RBI and for the regulated entities through the inspection of those entities on cyber preparedness, one kept in touch. And of course, the kind of changes which happen in the field are always something to keep track of. So when Mr. Narasimhan reached out to me, when he saw the post I had put out on this topic, new frontiers in data protection and cybersecurity, I thought I will use the same theme, and that's how I suggested the topic to him, which he was good enough to accept. And so I have a slide deck which I will use for kind of just guiding my thoughts mostly. But I would be very interested in getting to hear from you at the end of the topic, because this is a field which I'm sure you guys and girls are closer to than I will ever be. And it will be very good to hear from you based on what theories I propound in my slides. It will be good to get to hear from you how you find them, and if there are any doubts and queries that you have. So with this introduction, I would like to start sharing the screen, and uh, I'll use this slide deck for the further. I hope you are able to see the screen.
Please,
If
it's
not,
clear.
yeah, okay. So now this terminology of frontiers and new frontiers is a little interesting one. And as you might know, frontiers is a term used for new lands, and it has come from, obviously, like many things, from the North American kind of a space where there were lands to be discovered and brought under cultivation, or there was the famous gold rush which happened in Alaska and other places, California. And frontier is a term which kind of refers to that. In India, we used to have a frontier mail, which referred to a train which was going to, I think, Peshawar or towards that side of things. But somebody asked me why this new frontiers, because frontier by definition itself is a kind of a cutting edge area, and why this new frontiers? So I thought I will use some quotes. I'm very fond of quotes, by the way, as people who know me will tell you. So uh, the Earth is a now overpopulated place, and there's nothing left to discover unless you want to go into the deep seas and so on. But as the philosopher says, it's not only about seeking new landscapes, but having new eyes. So they tell you something which you have missed out earlier. So let's look at these two frontiers: data protection and cybersecurity. I wanted to start with this story. I also wrote a blog on this on LinkedIn earlier, and this is something which happened very recently. If you can see the graphic on the right-hand side, there is a screenshot of a tweet by one Ritu Kumar, who is the daughter of this gentleman. This person is Lieutenant General retired Sushil Kumar, PVSM, very distinguished career, retired as the Director General of EME in 1986. I recall I joined service in 1987, so he had already retired when I joined service, and I have just retired. So you can imagine this is a 93-year-old person. He has an account with the bank. I will not name the bank. But there are two accounts that he has. One was the account in which he received pension, and that is a account which showed inflows from the pension office. And then he would move some money into the checking account for doing small transactions or use the debit card on that at the point of sale terminals and so on. He had never used mobile or internet banking, and he had no reason to, because he's retired gentleman, very comfortable with doing the real world transactions and no need for any mobile. Very few transactions also. On 27th September, and this is pretty recent, I would think about a month and a half back, somebody visits him, first calls up and visits him saying that he's a bank representative. And this gentleman, of course, has a servant whose son who assists him in, dealing with modern technology in that sense. So the person who visited and the servant's son, they installed this some app on the mobile phone. So the person who was visiting said that this app is required because this bank wants this is a way to your account will be used in future and so on. So this old man had not much idea, so we kind of went along with that. And then this that particular app was used for doing multiple transfers, which resulted into emptying of his pension account, which was about almost 19 lakh rupees. Now, of course, his daughter lives abroad. She came back. Then they discovered that this account is empty, and then they went to the police. I had a complaint, went to the bank, and the bank told them that no, these transactions have happened, and then the whole investigation started. Till date, I think the police have been working on this, and they have been able to freeze some small amount in some account, and but there's no further development breakthrough to my knowledge on who did this and where the money went and so on. Multiple transfers happened. Some went to paying rent, somewhere utility payment, somewhere just account transfers and so on. Now, this case, somebody known to me referred this to me for whatever intervention or advice I could give, and I tried to speak to the Delhi police friends that I have to get this case prioritized, given the age of the complainant and the amount involved. And they were also working on this. But it was disturbing to kind of come across this case because I've been in field of fraud management. I worked in a bank. I have investigated bank fraud cases earlier, and so the state of the profession is such that it always sees new kinds of modus operandi, and the kind of new products which come out, they immediately are kind of identified to have certain loopholes, and the loopholes start getting exploited. Now, I had some questions in mind when I wrote about this particular case. So some of the questions which come to mind, and I don't know answers, and these questions are pretty open-ended, so they're not meant to find with anybody. But the one thought was that, was there a data leak in the bank? So how was it that this old person staying alone, having large balance in his account, was targeted? So is there some data leak in the bank itself? As we know, paper statements come, sometimes they are printed through vendors. There are cross sales happening where the calling is outsourced, and there are various ways in which the data dumps can be data dumps are taken out, and they may fall in wrong hands. This was one thought, that was there a data leak in the bank, and was there any record in the bank as to who has looked at his account? I mean, does the bank have those logs kept? Do they keep logs? Do the banking products have logging enabled or logging uh, as a feature? Because when I used to be in active hands-on kind of fraud prevention, that time I had seen that some of the banking products, core banking products, did not have this feature because they said it generates too many logs, etc. Now I don't believe it in today's age when the storage is so cheap and so much data is getting stored in the cloud, including video KYCs and all, which can be very voluminous files. But anyway, that is something which somebody will have to look into. Now, the other thing was, how is fraud management in the bank done? Do they have a separate category for senior citizens where, by definition, these people are not so technology friendly? They're not digital natives, as we call them. They are, and many of them don't even want these mobile banking. So what is the process to get them to identify and to get the consent on this? Very simple thing in fraud management has always been the velocity checks. How frequently are the transactions happening? Is there a pattern to it? Was this velocity abnormal? Does the person do these kind of transactions regularly, or is it something abnormal happening? So the fraud management systems have to be configured in such a way that they will catch these kind of flags and then block funds before the loss is too high. As you might know, some of you might know, there is a elaborate circular from the RBI on fixing the liability for fraud loss. It can be on the bank, it can be on the customer, depending on how quickly the customer responds and whether the customer has contributed to the fraud. Now, regulation looks very good on paper, but how do you actually interpret it? So what is meant by negligence? Now, I have seen multiple examples where senior people, very well-educated people, have lost money by being negligent or by just being duped. And the fraudsters are doing this for a living. So they every day do dozens of calls and they talk to people. Their ability to understand the other, who is at the other end and what will push the buttons of that person, is very, very sharp. So no normal person will have a chance to really protect themselves against this. Now, very interesting statistic that recently came to my notice. Again, there is a blog on my LinkedIn profile for this. Those of you who are interested in loan frauds, it's not an electronic fraud in that sense, but just for the sake of comparison, banks have lost almost 319 crore rupees in last 3 years on cyber frauds. That is the RBI's annual report published data, as compared to 3,83,000 crore loss, which was stolen by basically large borrowers. These are the loan frauds which were declared by banks. Now, if you compare these and the kind of diligence which is required for preventing one and ensuring that the other one doesn't become a fear factor among the customers, the banks, what is the is there differentiation in the approach the banks have? But these are little philosophical questions. Now, on the regulatory side, how do different banks compare? Some banks do well in preventing fraud. They have better systems, better teams, quicker investigations, and they have deterrent actions. Some banks don't really measure up to that. So, obviously, it's good to compare this and then help the weaker banks to catch up with the stronger ones when it comes to the maturity on fraud management. And lastly, the police also don't have adequate capacity. As we know, very small percentage of many cyber complaints get registered as FIRs, and they don't have the kind of analytics and the IT tools which will really help them to act fast, prioritize cases, and they get to hear these cases pretty late. So by the time the funds are already gone. Now, the point I wanted to raise here was about the pace of change that we see all around us. I take an example of banking because this is one domain which I am familiar with, and the kind of preparedness which is required. We all know the very ambitious Digital India program is there. Financial inclusion has been facilitated by Jan Dhan accounts. More digital transactions are being promoted, and so on. A lot of things are being done. And if the trust is to be maintained, we need to look at these kind of things which happened with General Kumar also. Now let's come to the what's happening in the area of fintech, because that's one thing you will hear very repeatedly nowadays. And one thing I looked up recently was the fintech funding in India. So the from 2014 onwards, as many as $28 billion have been invested. A lot of this money has gone into payments, and then followed by alternate lending and so on. And the newest segment is, of course, the neo bank segment. Now, the fintechs are very important for financial inclusion, or carrying out digital payments. Very exciting kind of technology applications are there. You might have read about recent RBI regulatory change on offline payments, and all this is going to be facilitated by technology, and this will help in taking care of the last mile or the underbanked, where the mobile signals are not there, or small ticket transactions are there. And so fintech is a very hot and interesting area from a financial inclusion point of view. As you know, the more the digital payments done by a person, the better is the ability of a bank to assess that particular customer for providing credit and so on. And credit is the key to making people do better in their life if they are doing business or they are doing financial planning, MSMEs and so on. So this is very important. Now, most of the fintechs are leveraging big data and social media analytics and AI algorithms. So this is the way they hope to reduce the cost of transaction, operate in a digital manner where there's no bank branch required, and people can be reached just through the mobile phones mostly. But the question of privacy principle comes to the fore when we look at this. And as you would know, the Personal Data Protection Bill has now been renamed as Data Protection Bill, just been introduced in the Rajya Sabha yesterday or day before yesterday, and it will see some legislation coming around it. And it is based on very good report prepared by Justice Sri Krishna committee, and it encapsulates the privacy principles on based on which the data rights of a person will be enforced. But if you look at the approach of fintechs, and for good reason, they look at all data as credit data. Now, whatever data can be gathered about a person, they will use it for doing better credit assessment and collections and so on. So there's a couple of fintechs who have been studied. They basically were operating in Kenya, and they were giving less than $500 loans, and they sought access to the contact book of the person, GPS data, SMS contents, and call logs. And every 24 hours, this data would be uploaded to these fintechs, which are based in California. And the USP of the fintech was to use the data to kind of assess, who could be given how much loan. And they shared this insight that people who make regular calls to the family are more probably responsible and 4% more likely to repay their loans. Likewise, another fintech called Branch was using Facebook for authentication and referral. So these are very innovative ways in which the underbanked are going to be offered loans. And typically, these people, if they don't get loan from a fintech, they will have to go to a money lender who charges very high rates of interest and so on. Now, the line between what is legitimate, what is desirable, what is responsible, and what is not can be very thin, as we recently saw in January last year and thereafter. There were these the loan apps based on a Chinese SDK, which were being misused for while collecting small ticket loans, short duration loans at high interest rates. And then necessarily many of these customers are not in a position to pay because they are right at the borderline of having regular income, not having regular income, and so on. But the debt collectors were misusing camera permissions, and they were calling up. In fact, yesterday I was reading a story about somebody losing a job because the boss got a call saying that this person has taken loan, is not paying. You should not keep this person as a person as an employee, and then you're checked out of the job. So all kinds of. So it is important to kind of put a framework of privacy, which is practical and workable around this innovation. Now, we looked at the kind of data which phones have already with so many apps being installed, all kinds of permissions being given. In fact, yesterday there was some discussion around the loan app of Navi, which is the new fintech around NBFC giving loans, and the conditions are pretty interesting. The loan app cannot be deleted from the mobile. It should be considered as a breach of conditions, and it seeks to look at all data and whatever the lender will find useful to look at, kind of thing. So it's kind of open-ended. I mean, this is all the discussion. I have not seen the privacy policy of the app myself, but people are a little concerned about what all is going to do. And this is the way fintechs will operate. And we have to kind of live with that, because we want financial inclusion to succeed, and also to the rights of people to be protected. And the golden mean of all what is possible and what should not be done. But if you look at the nature of the device, mobile phones, smartphones are being now used by a very large number of people. The number are likely to grow, and the smartphones come with various kinds of sensors. Now, sensors like Touch ID or fingerprint, they take the biometrics and compare them with what is stored there. But the fact is that the biometrics are being collected by the device. Proximity sensor, light sensors, even barometer sensors. If you walk up a flight of stairs, the phone will know, and then it will record, give you credit for exercise by walking upstairs, etc. But the fact is that it's knowing that you are moving from one level to another. Accelerometers, how the device is moving, and there are very good, interesting applications. But if you look at the study which came out some time ago, and what it showed was, people, when they hold their phones and enter various characters using the on-screen keyboard, each letter produces a certain movement of the device, which, if there's a malicious app which is kind of collecting data about the movement of the phone, it will be able to guess the letters being typed on the screen with 99% accuracy. Now, we know that the phones can be installed with all kinds of apps. Some apps show, there's a very famous app you might have heard of, which was just a torch, using the flash. It was a torch app, but it was basically collecting it was a spyware and collecting a lot of information. Now, with such powerful devices, what kind of information is being collected is something which always requires some watching. So when we look at frontiers of data protection, I look at these kind of issues which will come up as we move along, because somebody is going to push the envelope. Some of these innovators, they operate on the principle of move fast and break things, as we have heard famously. And somebody is going to say, okay, let's collect this information, and I'm sure there will be people who will game them also. So there was this famous story of a company giving its employees a Fitbit kind of a device which would count the number of steps, and then somebody produced a small device where you could put the Fitbit on that particular something which would oscillate, and without doing anything, the Fitbit would be recording that person is walking, whereas the person would be just relaxing. Because once you create incentives, there will be people who will want to shortcut and get those incentives. But coming back to the data protection frontier, I think this is something which we'll increasingly see, that the kind of data collection, which is not only about what the person who is the owner of the device allowing to be collected, but some other data which is never even understood also that is being collected, will also be collected. Now, a related point on to data protection is the right of privacy, which was traditionally defined as a right to be let alone. And now, of course, privacy was taken seriously in many communities, where the individualism is a strong value, typically the Western societies. It was taken very seriously. In Asian societies, the collectivist approach is stronger, the societal approach is stronger. So here we don't take privacy that seriously, and people will talk of things, because they have not been very sensitized to privacy. And now, of course, the younger generation is kind of getting introduced to the concept, and they will also be looking at this. But the earlier concept of privacy, which used to be there, now is transformed by the kind of datafication which has happened now. Like, so much data is being generated, by for each person. So now there is this famous quote, somebody said, I feel like a tuple in a database, like I'm a record in a database. But then now, of course, you have become a database yourself, because you are generating so much different kinds of data. Somebody is going to be looking at you as a database, and then the aggregation of that data with over a period of time, or as you move around, can give a much better idea about you than your family members or you yourself also. The device knows you better than you know yourself. Now, the analogous technology for all these sensors is the big data and the machine learning and AI, as it's called sometimes, kind of brings with that. So earlier, big data was defined by volume, velocity, and variety. But now those have been supplemented with value of the data, veracity, visibility, and visualization, how you can kind of also make sense of that data. So if we want to train algorithms, typically in machine learning, there are various kinds of training mechanisms, supervised and unsupervised. Data training models have to be validated by human intervention, or running on another data set, so that the models can be tweaked further. The difficulty of how to take out screen or personal data is very much there. It is very difficult to kind of segregate data de-identification. There are some known techniques, but there are always possibilities of re-identifying individuals just based on data across different data sets. So, re-identification of an individual is now included in the Data Protection Act as an offense by itself. It's a legal safeguard, but technologically it becomes very, very important for companies holding data to ensure that the data is protected and not leaked out, because once the data goes out in the public domain, it can be misused for various reasons. So these are all concerns which I don't think anybody has answer for, but this is something which the fintechs and other technology policymakers will have to grapple with. But if you look at the concept of consent itself, it is so complex. We assume that people will give consent, and then everything will be fine after that. But if you look at how, and we have now been in this digital age for many years now. If you look at on the left-hand side, there's a box of data subject. So data subject is the person whose data is being collected. And the time constraint with the person is so that, a study was done about 15 years ago, in late 90s, more than 2 decades. And it was found that if a person were to read all the privacy policies and understand them, it will take 6 weeks for 1 full years of use of internet. So that is the kind of time constraint which is there. Nobody reads privacy policies because they are very long and it's not practical to read them. So people don't have enough time. They don't have enough knowledge also that what does it entail to give consent to what is written in the policy. There are, of course, cognitive biases where the tricks like opt-in, opt-out kind of mechanisms, that they will say, okay, by clicking on this, you consent to this particular thing, and the yes button is more prominent and the no button is not so prominent, and so on. So those kind of biases which kind of drive human behavior also there. And lastly, service dependence is there. You want to avail of the service and you are very keen to do that, so you will not have enough incentive to really look at the implications of what you are consenting to. On the data controller side, they use nudging and coercion. We know how advertisers make us buy things which we can't afford also. And that is the way advertising works. But see, similar techniques are used by data controllers, people who are going to process your data. Then they can be offering some incentives. There's no negotiation there. Either you accept it or not, don't accept it, and so on. So this is a busy slide. I've taken this from a paper which came out just recently, 2021, and it kind of shows the complexity of privacy, how privacy is to be protected. Now, I will skip this slide because it kind of is a little tangential to what I was telling. But now let's come to the cybersecurity frontier part. And we talked about data protection, privacy, kind of frontier, but a linked frontier is also cybersecurity frontier. Now, when I'm saying frontiers, I'm not going to describe the whole thing. It's not a bird's eye view. It is just a very close view at some of the things that we are going to see. And of course, bird's eye views are going to be there, but close views also tell you something about something which is emerging. Now, this log4j, I'm sure being the Saga members, you would have heard of this already. But this is something which everybody is saying is, is the worst software liability ever. And it's there in everything that is connected to the internet. It can then assume very high privileges. People can run scripts using, they can just take over the log4j server and run scripts remotely and so on. Now, the challenge of dealing with this problem, and the problem was highlighted, and then the IT teams have been trying to manage this problem by patching. Whenever firstly they had to do scanning, where all the instances are there, and the scanning was also, one is of course the enterprise asset register, which is there, where you knew these are the software assets that you have, and these are the software elements in those assets that are there. If an organization is maintaining that, congratulations to them. That really helps. But otherwise, running authenticated and unauthenticated scans, sometimes static analysis of the code and runtime analysis of the code are also required. So that is the first job, to find out, what is the exposure area, and then try to patch. The team which is working on log4j patches itself is, as we know, log4j is an open source software component, and it is maintained by volunteers. It is not a paid product. So they have been releasing patches, and some of the patches had further vulnerabilities, but those got subsequently identified, and subsequent patching was also to be done, and so on and so forth. So the people who know this, they say that, this is a graphic I've taken from an article, which says that if your cyber risk was kind of declining or at a certain level, it has suddenly shot up in December because of this particular vulnerability. Now, the basic question which comes here, and there are multiple questions I have, probably I should go to the next slide. This is just a kind of a flow diagram which shows you, how to go about. I'm sure IT teams have done this, and some of you would have audited whether this is happening or not. But if you were to step back a little and say, okay, why is it that this whole IT thing creates so many problems, and there's no end to it, right? We know that there was this heartbeat problem, and there were those chip level vulnerabilities. We heard of various worms which came, and the ransomware attacks which happened. So this is a favorite quote of mine, which I always use when I'm talking about risk, cyber risk. This came in 2004. Professor Nicholas Carr, who was in Harvard University, he said that he made this very controversial statement that IT does not matter. And his reasoning was that, when a resource becomes essential to competition, but inconsequential to strategy, the risk it creates becomes more important than the advantages it provides. Now, let's take an example of prior era when industrial revolution was happening and electricity just came in. Factories which had electricity had a certain advantage because they could produce more and overtake their competitors. But then competitors also got electricity, so the advantage kind of went away. But now the other thing came up, that if your electricity got disrupted for some reason, then you are at a big disadvantage. So that's what has happened with IT. That the advantages are, you can't do without IT, of course, but the advantages are not so many as the disadvantages which are there when the IT thing which goes wrong. Now, we all know there is a certain framework around how cybersecurity is operated. This is my favorite framework, NIST. Of course, as you know, there are others also, and they are equally effective depending on what you like, what kind of familiarity with you have with the frameworks. And in this, the first pillar is of identify, and the first box in that is asset management. So obviously, as we all know, in this meme, which became pretty popular on the internet, we cannot protect what we don't know is with us, right? So asset management has always been a bit of a challenge, from what I've heard, because firstly, is it devices that you are looking at? Is it information sources that you are looking at? What are your assets, and how do you keep an inventory of it? Frankly, till recently, I had not heard of this thing called, this thing called software bill of materials, right? But this is something which I was going through, and it seems very interesting to know about, because uh, software is typically now made of small components which by themselves are being sourced from multiple places. Some of those are open source, some of those could be proprietary libraries and so on. And if a vulnerability is discovered in one of them, like what happened with Log4j, it will show up in at the operating side of things. So there's again a very good framework on software bill of materials, which talks of where you should, what kind of users should be worried about this. So people who write software should be worried. So they must uh, kind of keep detailed inventories of what all they are including in their software products. People who choose software, those who are in charge of procurement, they should look at these software bill of materials, and people who operate, because they have to ultimately make it work flawlessly. There are multiple benefits. Cost can be reduced by having exact idea of what you are using. Security risks, as we know, in this instance, can be reduced. Much faster identification resolution can be done on the operating side, and it's like using the right ingredients to make the right dish, so you can avoid known vulnerabilities. Uh, Licensing becomes that much easier, because some of these are their licenses tagged those. From a compliance point of view, the regulatory authorities expect you to have a good asset inventory and asset management. So that becomes much easier if you are maintaining good records of those. And from a assurance point of view, it becomes that much easier. So this again, supply chain security, something which is becoming more and more important after SolarWinds, now becomes something which is, I don't know whether some of the identity and asset management products which are there already have this built in. If it is there, the tool may be there, but the inventory may not be, in the process of building that inventory may not be mature, and so on and so forth. So there's no end to this kind of maturity journey which is there. And so this is the slide I want to show, the last, before we close and take questions. So the internet, or this whole IT infrastructure, is such a complex thing now that nobody has full visibility into it. Otherwise, it would have been already identified as an issue and fixed. Now, there is a certain team, which is a very small team. Actually, there are just three people working on this Log4j, and they are doing their best to release, updates and so on and so forth. And there was a, earlier a famous saying that with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So that was the premise of open source. But look at this. I mean, something which was found while people were playing the game called Minecraft. That's where it was found, and then it kind of became widely known. This was not found in the normal testing, right? So there are not enough eyes on the bugs, and there are not enough understanding of how many bugs are there. Interestingly, as as the third bullet shows, this was found in Alibaba Cloud instance, and the Chinese government has suspended a deal with the Alibaba Cloud people, because they expected these vulnerabilities to be reported to them first without being shared with the community. So there are nation state issues also which come up in these kind of things. So the first point I wanted to raise is free stuff sustainable? Everybody is very fond of free stuff, free email accounts, free software. Open source software is supposed to be free, but is it sustainable? Because if there are no financial incentives, how will the knowledge management happen? How will record keeping be done? How will of course, no software manufacturer accepts any liability for buggy software. That is a separate discussion altogether. But the incentives have to fix it. I'm not saying this way or that way, but free stuff can be sustainable. I mean, some of the most valuable information on the internet is held by Wikipedia, which is a very robust process of improving itself. But does it apply to all areas of open source software? Why aren't governments taking care of the ecosystem issues? Now, some of these are ecosystem issues, right? And governments have the resources and the responsibility and the visibility. So they should be doing more rather than just kind of leaving it to volunteers. I'm sure software bill of management regulation will come in at some granularity soon, or it should come because they're already best practice kind of initiatives. You will hear bug bounty is not a mainstream, especially in India. I think organizations are not very keen on participating in bug bounties because of reputation issues and so on. And but I think bug bounty is a very important, good way of finding bugs, and that should be made more mainstream. But these are some of the kind of open-ended things which I wanted to put before we close. And this is the matching quote, the previous quote that I had, that at the end of all our exploring, we should arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So I think frontiers, especially these kind of virtual frontiers, tell us that we need to have new eyes, and we should know the place where we are in more detail. So that's what I thought I will cover in today's talk. I hope I have been able to convey something of interest to you, and I'll be happy to take questions now. Here are my contact details. I'll be happy to interact with you if you have offline queries, or you want to follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'll be very happy to continue the conversation there. So I will stop broadcasting, and we can have the questions, answers if we have time now.
Yep. Thank you so much. A lot of interesting thoughts. We are already started getting feedback on the chat window. You will also be able to look into that. A couple of questions which have come up in this chat window, or rather Q&A window. I just thought I'll bring it up. I have a question from Tejas. According to Canalys, there were more records and servers compromised in 2021 than in the past 15 years combined. So in the wake of Air India cyber espionage, how do you see the Indian infrastructure, especially grid lines, seaports, airlines, protect itself from the increasing level of cyber threats?
So if I understood the question correctly, the question is about critical infrastructure, transportation.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So my experience is more kind of limited to banking, but from what I have seen, the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center is there, and they have been improving their capability and capacity, and they have, I think, very specific initiatives for critical infrastructure. There are excellent initiatives on, I think, vulnerability reporting. I think there are the information sharing and certs, especially for power sector. I'm aware of 3 or 4 certs which have been set up. Of course, there is no endpoint to this, as we know. It is basically a journey, and each sector has to find its own secret sauce, so to say. So I hope some of these sectors are vulnerable to physical kinetic attacks, as we say. And famously, there was a story of Mumbai power outage, 3-4 hours kind of a outage was there. And I think New York Times published a report that the Chinese hackers were involved in this. So we didn't know what happened really, because nothing was put out in public domain. But these attacks can have much more serious consequences than just a financial transaction or money loss. I would think these are of much more critical importance. The power sector, transportation, nuclear power plants. Of course, there is, as you know, there is a differentiation between operational technology and information technology. Operational technology is much more critical. But as we know, the malware can cross air gaps and get into operational technology, as happened with the famous Iranian nuclear plant infiltration case. So I think it's a difficult problem, but I hope things are improving and so enough is being done.
Sure. There's one question from Seema Kumari. What are the aspects of social media analytics which is being used by FinTech? Can you just give a couple of examples, for us to correlate it?
Okay, I think social media is typically people have profiles on social media platforms. Twitter is very much a public medium. Facebook, the way it started, and many people have accounts which are all friend networks, and everything is visible to anybody who wants to look at them, photographs. I think the analytics which come from those are about, who is friends to whom. You are generally friendly with people of your own social and economic parity. What kind of analytics can be run on the lifestyles, and the kind of open domain, public domain information on lifestyles, expenditures is there. So those information sources are there, and I think it used to be much easier earlier. It's become little tougher with more privacy awareness, and the platforms, I think, also have become slightly more careful. But social media is an important source of background as well as specific information.
Got it. There is one other question which has come up. Is it it's innovative to think fintechs are considering Facebook and other social media apps? But from a Pareto's law perspective, it is not that the focusing of 80% of common man and focusing enough on the 20%, which is the so-called financial criminals, contributing major loss to the economy. So what are the measures which have been done to penalize the defaulters? Are there measures which bank can take actions from the personal details, not providing loans, etc., to these set of people?
So if we're looking at the lending area, now the default rates in some of the early fintech initiatives were pretty high because of identity issues or credit appraisal going wrong, etc. But I think fintechs have enough backing to tide over that, and then they will also necessarily improve. Now, the challenges in our country, as we know about identity management, have been largely addressed by Aadhaar and the kind of mobile phone penetration which is there. The challenge, I don't think, is so much in locating a person as a cost involved in doing that, and the kind of framework which is required to be there. But I think the fintechs will figure out in terms of credit appraisal before they disburse and how much amount they will disburse, and keep the losses limited, because ultimately at some point they also have to go back to the investors, and they are looking to IPOs, etc. So they will figure out a balance between how to weed out the fraudsters, so to say.
In terms of these banks, how are you actually seeing that, despite frauds taking place, Indian banks, how are they responding it, and how is there some sort of a tracking mechanism with respect to RBI open cases, pending, closed?
So the most significant initiative which recently has come about is the I4C portal, which is set up by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So this is operated where banks are all given logins, and the data sharing is happening. So there is a cybercrime.gov.in portal where people can report to crime. The effectiveness of this portal will continue to go up as the reporting time reduces. So if a person loses money, and the first call the person does is to his own bank, if that the data sharing becomes seamless through APIs and all, it will become pretty effective in terms of blocking funds before they're withdrawn. But as you know, the fraudsters always are ahead of the game. So they have people and mules ready to withdraw the money. When they choose to strike, the mules are always ready in the ATMs with the cards to take out the money. And that's how the cash gets withdrawn out of the beneficiary accounts. So it will be a cat and mouse game, but I think the effectiveness can improve as the platform improves further.
Fair enough. How do you think this Web 3.0 is impacting cyber security in banking? No doubt we are coming up with the innovative products, innovative solutions, right? But on the security side, what is it that you're noticing?
So to my understanding, Web 3.0 is a hype term as of now. If you look at Gartner's hype cycle, it is somewhere on that rising peak. So Web 3.0, many people, equate with DLT, and then there are use cases around that. But I have not seen a use case which has really succeeded except Bitcoin, which is the initial one. And Bitcoin has also moved from a medium of exchange to store of value at this point because of the large amount of money which has come in. I have another blog actually on cryptocurrency, which people may want to look at. But I am a little skeptical. Being a cop for many years, I am always skeptical about things. But I am a little skeptical about this Web 3.0 becoming a mainstream technology with great value addition, because it is very costly to run DLT, as you know.
In terms of the law enforcement agencies, are there some sort of international collaborations, coordinations which is going on so that you can nab cyber criminals? Are the law enforcement agencies geared up from that front?
See, the international cooperation mechanism on criminal investigation is very rudimentary. Interpol has been around for a long time, but they basically operate at a policy level. There's no operational mechanism through Interpol. So what happens is, between countries, there used to be another convention called the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, which enabled people to exchange metadata, at least not the contents, etc., but at least metadata which give clues to investigators. Unfortunately, India has not been a signatory to that. And I used to be in NASCOM in 2005 when I would very vehemently pose this as a requirement that India should join an international community, but it never happened for whatever reasons. What happens is, if there are international cross-border attacks, very difficult to investigate them. There is a procedure called letters rogatory, which requires going to a court, obtaining court orders, going through MHA and then Minister of External Affairs, and then their counterparts in other countries to get that particular thing executed. It is not suited for digital crimes at all, because the evidence is volatile and the perpetrators can overwrite and move very fast.
Okay, what's your view on this data privacy for anonymity? Identity getting disclosed in a social media sort of a situation. Any thoughts on that side? There are these anonymous identity. All of a sudden, they get disclosed, even though they are posted, etc., on as anonymous. These are getting disclosed as such. Any thoughts on those side?
So I'm not very clear what is the exact scenario that is being talked about. But see, anonymity is not a crime. It is not correct to equate anonymity with criminality. People want to be anonymous for various reasons. And if there is a certain framework around it, if some data controller has collected information and that information is leaked, or which enables somebody else to re-identify the person, then that is definitely going to be a crime under the new Data Protection Act. Of course, somebody doing criminal activities has to be identified and prosecuted. That's a separate requirement. But by and large, anonymity is something which people take for granted till it is not resulting into some criminal behavior of harassing others or trying to create enmity between groups, etc. That's not to be objected.
Sure. In the interest of time, I'll probably just take a couple of more questions, if that is okay with you.
Yeah, I have enough time.
Sure. This cryptocurrency challenges, and how are banks looking at this cryptocurrency challenges, considering, from a RBI perspective, from a regulatory perspective? What are your thoughts on that? How do you see banks accepting or adopting cryptocurrency?
No. So first, let me be clear. I don't represent RBI's views at all. I used to work with RBI, but that was on the technology side, not on the policy side. So the views around cryptocurrency that I have are my own views. And I don't think banks are currently much worried about cryptocurrency, because they don't have any balance sheet risks as such in this particular area. Now, cryptocurrency started off as a product to replace fiat currency, right? That is never going to happen. We saw that with Bitcoin. trying to accept one country. Nobody has accepted it as a medium of exchange. All central banks are actively looking at central bank digital currency as the alternative to Bitcoin, which is a little surprising because Bitcoin is designed to evade regulation. And people who designed Bitcoin were people who were not happy with 2008 financial crisis, which happened where many people felt that regulators had not done their job properly, etc. But CBDC is a different end goals, and they are meant for improving the digital transactions, firstly, also to keep better account of transactions. Like the Chinese experiment on CBDC is more about the banks knowing the end users' financial behavior. And so there is a school of thought that some people believe that CBDC is not required if there is enough digitalization of transactions which have happened. So many countries really are not looking at CBDC because firstly, it will require the central bank to maintain a lot of infrastructure around those CBDC accounts or tokens.
Correct.
And innovation also is something which only private sector will be better placed to do. So I don't think it is a very settled area as of now. But I wanted to differentiate between the cryptocurrencies and the mainstream kind of the currencies. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin started as cryptocurrencies, but now they have become crypto assets, more for investment and speculation rather than actual transactions.
Great. In the recent past, NPCI has also started entering into tie-ups with Dubai and few other countries where they're providing their infrastructure for this UPI or overall instant payment setup. How do you see India evolving as an overall technology, probably a leader in this space in the banking, in the fintech evolution?
So I don't have enough information about this tie-up, but I think as we all know, UPI is a great success story in India, and the way it grew and the kind of maturity it has acquired, the kind of volume of transactions it is doing is phenomenal. So I think this is a good shining example for other countries. But the architecture and the concept are not really new, or it doesn't require a proprietary kind of approach to do this. So I'm sure many countries will set up their own systems. If you look at the CBDC experiment in Cambodia, they are very much attempting what UPI has attempted. And it will be good to see UPI going elsewhere. And I'm sure NPCI would be probably looking at that. But I think many countries will push, now that they have seen India's example, for this kind of platform-based digital transactions rather than proprietary or kind of closed system transactions.
If any of our members want to contribute to the government of India in terms of the data protection, cybersecurity topics, it could be as a volunteer in terms of policy related. What are the avenues which you have come across?
I think the data protection bill, which was there, was open for consultations, and the joint committee of the parliament was inviting people to represent. I think that was the time. But now the bill is in the Rajya Sabha, so it will probably get enacted. But in terms of standing arrangements for collaboration, I think MHA has an initiative for cyber volunteers. I think CERTIN probably does some capacity building. NCIPC runs a reporting program for vulnerabilities. So I think if people were to spend some time on these websites, you'd get more ideas about how to contribute.
Fantastic. One last question. Banks are moving into collaborations or tie-up with startups and fintech. How is security being considered? Is from an RBI, from a technology perspective, are there any thoughts or any views which has come up in terms of how the thoughts are from your past experience?
As I said, I don't know.
No, this is purely on your personal thoughts. Nothing on the official. Yeah.
I think RBI has been issuing guidance about various cybersecurity areas. For example, payment system security, very detailed instructions came last year. Cybersecurity framework for cooperative banks or NBFCs has been issued, and the guidance for scheduled commercial banks has always been there. So, and there is, it kind of becomes more and more detailed and more rigorous. So the FinTech business is necessarily in collaboration with regulated entities. So fintechs themselves are not regulated entities, but they have to work with NBFCs and banks collaboratively. So the expectations of cybersecurity, which are there for banks and other regulated entities, will cover them as well. And those are required to be included in the agreements that the banks sign with them. And of course, fintechs may not have the size or the maturity to follow everything, but if they follow the contractual obligations rigorously, I think they should be able to meet the expectations.
Fantastic. Any lessons learned from this PMC bank fraud or something similar on those lines? What are your thoughts on that?
I have no thoughts on that. I don't want to comment on something which I may have covered in the previous work.
Point taken. Point taken. Great. Great. So I think most of our questions you have been able to answer, and we had a very fruitful interaction. And it's been 10 minutes past our scheduled time, and we see a whole of our members still glued onto the screens. You've also seen the wonderful feedback which is actually coming in the chat window. On behalf of the entire ISACA chapter, I think I should really thank you for sharing and more importantly spending your time, your valuable time despite your busy schedule and more on the weekend. I think a good round of applause from all of us, probably a virtual applause from all of us, and really appreciate you being part of it. And we would be looking forward for regular interactions probably in the days to come. And I really thank you on behalf of the ISACA chapter.
Thank you very much. As I said, I really admire the saga community, and it's good to meet people on various occasions and exchange ideas. And the questions, I think, brought up the higher priority issues that people think about. So great to know and great to be here.
Thank you so much. And dear members, we have posted the links on the chat window for the social media accounts of ISACA Bangalore. We have our ISACA CISA review classes, which has just started. If any of your friends or your colleagues wish to register, feel free to kindly inform them. All of this information is available in the ISACA Bangalore chapter website and the Telegram channel. Wishing you all a great 2022 ahead. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and really appreciate all of you taking time off. Thank you. Special thanks to Mr. Nandakumar. Thank you to all the members. And with this, we would be signing off. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.